Alright, what we're doing is, the difference here is we actually need to get an answer. So, first to solve kinds of problems, we set it equal to 0, and we're going to factor. Then we're going to set each factoring part is what makes this part possible, and this part is really easy to do, because solving each factor set equal to 0 is simple. Solve them, and then you got to check your answers. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to do this one on the next page. So already set equal to 0. Sweet. So now we need to factor this. So as before, we need numbers that multiply to a 3h squared times negative 16. So 3h squared times negative 16 is negative 48h squared. And that's what they need to multiply to. And then they need to add to 2h. Alright, so they have to add up to a 2h. So let's see, what numbers will multiply to a negative 48 and add to a 2? Well, the bigger number, we have to have a positive and a negative, so they multiply to give us a negative. And then the bigger has to be positive, so that when we add them, we get a positive result. So you could work through all the factors, negative 1 and 48, negative 2 and 24, negative 3 and 16, negative 4 and 12, and that's really laborious, so you want to kind of think ahead if you can. But if you get stuck, just do it this way. Negative 6 and 8, and finally, this is the one that's going to be adding up to a 2h, right? So if I want to be really complete, I could do 1h, 48h, and that adds up to 47h, and that's not the one we want. 2h and 24h, and that adds up to 22h, and that's none of these are the ones we want. This is the one we want. Alright, so now what we do, I'm going to do the box method. You can do it the other way too. Either way, whatever lets you factor this kind of a trinomial, okay? So we put our 3h squared, put our negative 16 here, and then instead of having the 2h, we're going to have a negative 6h and an 8h. And once again, it doesn't matter which of these boxes. I could have put the 8h up here and the negative 6h here. That'd be fine. So factor out, what's the GCF here? It's a negative 2. What's the GCF here? Just an h. Here we have a 3h. And here we have an 8 is our GCF. So now that factors to h minus 2 and 3h plus 8. So h minus 2 times 3h plus 8. Alright, so there are our factors. That's our factored form of this. So I'm just going to rewrite that over here. This is equivalent to h minus 2 3h plus 8 equals 0. So all I would do is rewrite the form of this, so we just factored it. Now we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So setting this one equal to 0 gives me h minus 2 equals 0. So this is an easy one to solve. All we got to get is h equals 2. There's one of my answers. Setting the second equal to 0, get 3h plus 8 equals 0. Right? That's why it says each factor. So set this factor equal to 0. And this is a simple equation to solve as well. 3h equals negative 8. So divide both by 3. And we get h equals negative 8 thirds. Those are our two answers. So let's check our two answers. So the first one's easy enough to check. Oops, sorry. First one's easy enough to check. Just plug a 2 in everywhere there's an h. So we have 3 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 16. And that gives us 2 squared is 4. So that's 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is 12. Plus 2 times 2 is 4. Minus 16. And that does in fact equal 0. So that works. Now how do we check this negative 3/8 or negative 8 thirds? Especially for those of you that don't do fractions, it's going to be tough because that's a fraction. But fractions are people too, and we can do math with fractions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to use your calculator. Alright, so we want to get that plug this negative 8/3 into this function here. Alright, so where can I put this so it's not in the way? So what we're going to do is, actually if I just make this guy smaller maybe, whatever. What you do is you plug in negative 8/3 as a fraction or as a division everywhere in your function. So if you have 3 times negative 8/3, this is our h that we're plugging in squared. It's 3 times parentheses. Always put parentheses around your fractions to keep them the order of operations right. So negative 3 times negative 3/8 or 8/3 rather squared, and then plus 2 times, now use a parentheses, negative 8 divided by 3. Now that's how we put 8/3 as a fraction, minus 16, and that equals 0. And that's just one way. There's many other ways to use this kind of a calculator. So if you have this kind of calculator and you want to see other ways to check your answers, please see me sometime outside of class, and I'd be happy to show you how to use this calculator. So we've checked both our answers. We've done everything. We've completely solved this problem. So let's do one more. I'm going to do this one a little faster than I just did the one now. So we need to set our quadratic. A quadratic is anything with a squared term in it, equal to 0. So that's not done yet. So what I got to do is subtract 2 from both sides, and that gives me a 15n squared minus n minus 2 equals 0, because those cancel and give us 0. So now we've set it equal to 0. Now we have to factor. So we need the things that we're going to multiply to a 15 times negative 2, so a negative 30. And they need to add to a negative 1, right? It's like a negative 1 here. So what do we got? If you try and think of numbers in your head, it's a lot easier if you can kind of use some common sense and say, oh, 6 and a 5 have a difference of 1. The bigger one needs to be negative. So negative 6 and 5, these multiply to 30, and they add to negative 1. So those are our numbers. So now we just go to our grid, or just factor by grouping if you're doing it the other way. And we've got 15n squared minus 2 there. And then we can put these in either box. I'm going to put the negative 6n here and the 5n there. It's good to get in the habit of keeping this n squared here. So n squared and n. That way you know that it has to be a 6n and a 5n multiply to give you the 30n squared and add up to a 1n. So you don't forget to put them in your box here. So then what we're going to do is factor each. Come on. And so that's a negative 2 comes out of this. Out of these we can get a 5n. Out of these we can get a 3n. And out of these there's no common factor, so it's just a positive 1. So that gives us this, which is equal to this, is equal to this. 5n minus 2 times 3n plus 1 equals 0. Don't forget equals 0, because we're solving this. We're not just factoring it. Factoring is just this one middle step, right? It's just this one middle step. But we got to actually completely solve it. So we're going to set each factor equal to 0. And so that's 5n minus 2 equals 0. And we get 5n equals 2. Let's divide both by 5. And we get n equals 2 over 5. And then if we set the other one equal to 0, 3n plus 1 equals 0. Minus 1 minus 1. 3n equals minus 1. N equals negative 1/3 if you divide both sides by 3. Now these both came out to fractions, so how are we going to check our answer? You guessed it. Good idea. Use your calculator. So I plugged in the negative 1/3 into my calculator, and I went back to the original. That's why it's only 15 times what we're plugging in squared minus what we're plugging in. And it's a minus a negative, so minus a negative 1. And then that gives us a 2, and it should equal 2, just like we expected. And then if we plug in the other one, which I've already done, so I will call that up. Plug in the 2/5, and that gives us 2. So if we plug in 2/5 for n, then we get a 2. So both of them worked. So we've checked our answers as well. All done. Now make sure that you guys try these two problems here. Already set equal to 0, so just factor, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. This you have to move these over so that you have some quadratic equals 0. Alright, see you in class tomorrow.